Hello. Our story begins inside the Chancellor's office. Anakin had just cemented himself as a temporary apprentice to Lord Sidious. There was one directive: wipe out all the Jedi. Do not hesitate and show no mercy. Though before Skywalker was sent out, he was informed that the clones would have one task. Skywalker would also fulfill that same task. While Anakin wasn't privy to the Grand Inquisitor betraying his brothers and sisters to create a diversion, he would be informed to spare the Younglings. Anakin hadn't even considered that. Killing Younglings didn't seem so characteristic of him, but he supposed that if he came across them, then he would kill them. Now with Sidious telling him to spare them, he believed that maybe this whole Sith thing wasn't that bad. Sidious made it clear that he wasn't to interact with any of the Younglings anyways. His main goal was to actually avoid them. There was no given explanation for this, but Sidious was a meticulous planner. He had the Grand Inquisitor taking the Younglings out of the temple at some point. They'd be taken to a secret location to keep them safe until Sidious arrived to take them under his wing. Everything was just a gear turning in the grand scheme to undermine the Republic, take Skywalker as his new apprentice, and completely wipe out the Jedi. Lord Vader went and Operation Nightfall began. Across the galaxy, clone commanders and captains were given their orders to execute the Jedi. Thousands of voices cried out all at once as they were slaughtered by the men they spent 3 full years serving with. Vader, on the other hand, marched up the steps of the Jedi Temple with the 501st in stone, their blasters primed and the echoes of Order 66 circulating throughout their minds. The Jedi were so unprepared, and once the clones walked right past the gates, a war began. The Jedi weren't prepared enough for this, and when the blaster fire started, all they could do was try and defend their young. Clones were given 2 directives under their one task: spare the Younglings or stun those who tried to fight back. There was no reason to execute those who would serve a much greater purpose in the future. Vader made first contact with Sindralik and his 2 students. The battle between the 3 of them wasn't even tense. Anakin quickly grabbed a hold of the unprepared Sindralik and lifted him back with such force that it didn't take more than a couple swings to completely rip through his 2 students, serving him, and then kill Sindralik himself. Vader moved throughout the temple, cutting down anyone who got in his way. On the other side of the temple, the future Grand Inquisitor was doing his Emperor's work by standing his own with the temple guards. He was one of the more talented of his unit, but the surprise certainly helped him with his attack. They didn't expect one of their own to hunt them down from behind. Grand Inquisitor thrust his blade through their backs and engaged with the others who were able to turn around in time. His skill was genuinely remarkable. The clones were hunting like packs of wild rancors. They slaughtered anyone they came across that wasn't clearly a youngling. The Jedi Masters worked as quickly as they could to get in between the clones and their younglings, but all their attempts proved to be futile. Commander Appa was tasked with finding the young Jedi named Grogu. His main goal was simply to capture the child, and so, with such a goal, Appa was able to direct more clone troopers into his direction, which allowed him to get to the child before Keller and Beck could. The clones, despite their quick work of the Knights Masters and even a couple Padawans, were able to gather the younglings up in an area away from the battlefield, though by this point more of the younglings had been stunned, simply due to the fact that they were trying to fight back. A lot of the younglings realized that there were more of them than clones, and they tried to create a little rebellion that was squashed before it could go anywhere. If it took 2 or 3 clones to kill a knight or a master, then it wouldn't take all that many to stun the younglings. Though there was something different about the Jedi inside the temple. Most of them were simply teachers, monks, or practitioners of the Force. None of them really were all that active in the battlefronts or in the war period, which only made their execution all the more easy. As Vader finished up working his way through the halls of the temple after assassinating Jedi Master Shakti during her meditation, he went to where his master was waiting. Sidious stepped through the gates of the temple for the first time in his life, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of enjoyment. He'd always wanted this moment, a moment where he could finally walk through the gates of a place he actively loathed for so many years of his life. Sidious told Vader to complete the next part of his mission. Vader bowed and scurried off to the Jedi hangar bay to get a starship so he could go to Mustafar. Shortly after Vader disappeared, Grand Inquisitor came and found his master, giving the Sith Lord a head count of the Jedi Padawans and younglings that were captured, and a number of them that were killed in the crossfire. A solid number of Jedi were killed in the Purge, but there were 2,309 younglings that survived the Purge itself. On top of that, he anticipated that a number of former Padawans would return to the temple, due to the message left up saying that the war had ended and come to a conclusion and that the temple was safe to return to. His suspicion would be proven correct, but not just for the Padawans, but Knights as well. It would be devious enough to trick another couple Masters back to the temple, 3 of them being council members. Sidious set up a throne in the Great Hall of the temple. While clones were moving dead bodies around, he had a perimeter of clones surrounding the younglings who had all been captured. The younglings were seated in front of his throne looking at him as he spoke to them, telling them about what they would become. He expressed that he was only here to save them from the narrow, dogmatic view of the Jedi. He put himself up there as their liberator, as a savior, which in his mind he was. Before Sidious could finish his little talk, he had to run in with a brave Jedi Master. Coleman Cash of the High Council was here to save the children, and only within a few strikes, he was disarmed and slaughtered by Sidious. The children around couldn't believe it. How was this possible? Sidious was so powerful. How could he just kill a council member with little to no effort? Though that wasn't the prize of his accomplishments. Hours later, a fight would be heard from the steps of the temple. Sidious knew another Jedi had stumbled into the trap. When the clones heard the commotion, they prepared for a counterattack on whoever was on the steps fighting. But Sidious told them that they would have no reason to engage. This was hard for the clones to hear because all they could hear was their brothers being massacred on the steps. Their communication devices were still on, and it sounded like an army of lightsabers had arrived to retake the temple. But only two hooded individuals walked through the front gates of the temple. Sidious smiled. He knew exactly which one of them had come. He knew it was going to be Yoda. He wanted to make an example of the late Grand Master of the Jedi Order. All the younglings looked over with hopeful expressions, believing that Yoda and Obi-Wan would liberate them from the grasp of the Sith Lord. As the two Jedi Masters walked in, they saw the throne and the younglings seated around him. Yoda was furious, and both Kenobi and Sidious could feel the rage coming from Yoda. This wasn't anything like Yoda to be like this, but there was so much anger within him. Not only did he fail the Order, but the Sith Lord was making a mockery out of him, and now every single student he taught was in danger, just sitting there. Yoda didn't have time to tell Obi-Wan to back away. He didn't want to engage Sidious with Kenobi by his side. It would be distraction, but they needed to act quickly. Yoda's lightsaber ignited, and Obi-Wan followed suit as they moved into their signature poses. Sidious grinned and rose from his throne, telling the Grand Master that he'd failed. All of these students were now his. Kenobi waited for Yoda to move, and he could feel the darkness radiating from his master. It was so uncharacteristic, but he was at this point breaking. Yoda launched himself forward. Sidious grinned, igniting a storm of electricity and blasting it forward. Yoda was able to block it, but Sidious vanished. Kenobi was stuck in a duel against Sidious. He moved like a blur, and all the Jedi could do was hope that they could pull a victory out of this. There wasn't even a chance anymore that the rise of the Sith could be stopped. Kenobi blocked every single strike that came his way. His mastery of form through is the only thing saving him in this moment. Sidious hissed and reached his hand out, launching Kenobi backwards in a blaze of electricity. He turned around with elegance in his step as Yoda launched himself at him. The Sith Lord matched Yoda with speed, pace, and precision. Not a move made by the Grand Master could stop the return of the Sith. The younglings watched a Jedi they respected for their entire lives as his order slowly fell out from under him. They could see him losing himself. Sidious was remarkable in his strength. Younglings didn't know how to feel about it. Yoda tried to counter Sidious, but there was nothing he could do. The Jedi Grand Master beat and parried and bashed his lightsaber in every which direction he could, but at the end of it all, he was nothing but a failure. The one who caused the Order to fall from such a grace, the reason the Jedi could not be saved, and the reason Darth Sidious could rise in the ashes of a broken republic to become the Emperor. Sidious launched Yoda back into the throne. The throne caved in around him. Obi-Wan got up and ran forward, trying to save Yoda, but he was nothing for Sidious to deal with. He grabbed Kenobi with the Force and lifted him up into the air. Sidious turned to the younglings and told them that this is what weakness looked like. Obi-Wan tried to break free, but electricity sped from Sidious's fingers as it covered Obi-Wan's body as he cried out in agony. He was then launched across the Great Hall, slamming into a pillar and dropping out of sight. Sidious told Commander Appo to kill him. He nodded his head, grabbing a couple troopers and moving in to find the Jedi Master. Yoda launched himself back at Sidious, but the Dark Lord was all too powerful. He parried his strike and thrusted his blade through Yoda's stomach. The Grand Master dropped his lightsaber and looked up at Sidious. His head started to bounce as if he was trying to focus, trying to regather any sort of composure, but there was literally nothing. He was nothing. Yoda slowly fell to the ground. Sidious ignited his second lightsaber and raised it above his head. He told the children watching in horror that the Jedi were dead. He dropped the blade and slashed through Yoda's limp body as he fell down into two pieces. He grinned and looked at the students. He stood amongst them, then deciding that it was time for him to speak up. He told them that they had two choices: live or die. If they made the wrong choice, then they would know nothing but pain. This was their one chance to be a part of something that would change the face of the galaxy for the better. If they ran from it, then nothing would save them. Their order was destroyed, and their masters, as already proven, were no match for the dark side. If they mounted together, they wouldn't be either. If there was any hope left in the room, it had vanished and died out by now. The death of Yoda in front of all their eyes was as clear as it could get, that there was no one in the galaxy to save them. They all had a collective choice to make: join the Sith, or be wiped from existence, just like their former order. Commando Appa reported that Kenobi had vanished, and Sidious just used it to fuel the fires. He told the younglings that not even their masters were willing to sacrifice their lives to save them. The horror on their faces and the confusion in their hearts only made it better to Sidious. He called upon the Grand Inquisitor and told him to take the younglings elsewhere. Grand Inquisitor quickly came in, rounded up the Younglings, taking them to a number of vessels, and departed to a Venator that would take the future of the Sith to a planet that Sidious was going to use for the time being. The home of the Sith was too obvious. Instead, he'd be going to one of the many secret locations around the galaxy. Currently, there were construction droids on the planet fixing everything up. By the time the Younglings arrived, everything would look as it was supposed to. The Younglings were going to the planet of Crais II. On Coruscant, Obi-Wan didn't know what to do. He fractured a piece of his vertebrae when he slammed into the wall. He couldn't be able to hold his own against Sidious anyways. He could only hope that Anakin survived or that his death was quick. Obi-Wan limped away from the temple and looked for a place of refuge. He couldn't rely on Bail because he was inside the Senate building. He needed a place to go, and he would do it alone. He and Bail would contact each other if they needed, so he would do that when the time was right. For now, Obi-Wan needed a place to bunker down. He got to the hangar bay inside the temple and took a vessel out of the hangar and departed away from the city planet. Lord Vader wouldn't be requested back to the planet of Coruscant until Sidious was finished with his work. He was going to make sure Padme lived, but of course, it was on his conditions. Using the dark side temple that was suffocating under the Jedi temple for millennia, he opened up the dark side unlike ever seen before. The temple's peak ripped through the floor of the Jedi temple, and the seed of darkness spread across the surface of Coruscant. Sidious was all-powerful as a Sith Lord, and he only continued to perpetuate his power in the dark side. He would rule supreme. He launched his seed of darkness into the breath of every single being who lived on Coruscant. It would act as an infection to drown out the goodness in people's hearts. To be a Sith, he needed to thrive off of people bringing out the very worst of themselves, and he would do that to them. As for Padme, she was just another piece of the puzzle. He needed her if he wanted to turn Lord Vader into the perfect apprentice. He needed someone to be his understudy so that the Younglings became warriors. They had someone to keep in check. It was the brilliance of the Sith, and for Sidious, it'd be brilliant in reinstating his new reign. If the Sith Empire were to thrive, he needed a powerful student, which Vader was. He then needed a role for the individuals to chase after, something for them to yearn for. Apprentice to the Dark Lord of the Sith was that role. If he could manage to get every single Sith in his little force to chase after Skywalker's role, none of them would be looking up at him. They would never notice that he is standing at the peak because all they would want is what Skywalker had. Grand Inquisitor would also add to that. He wouldn't be put into a position to covet Lord Vader's role either. Instead, he would have his own division. Sidious loved the thrill of this rise. It made him all the more powerful on the dark side. He would allow everything to just naturally fall into place now. No Jedi would dare challenge him, which is exactly what he wanted. He brought Lord Vader back to Coruscant, and Anakin would be able to enjoy being with his wife as they would have their children without any complications. The beginning step was complete. As for the children of Skywalker, Sidious understood that they were here for the sole role of bringing balance to the Force. The Dark Lord understood how the Force worked, and because he understood how it worked, he would be able to turn these twins into future pupils, the ones that would replace Vader. Everything was set in motion. He would just continue to allow it to flourish. He would give the delegation a 2,000 small victories and allow Padme to feel like Anakin helped her earn those victories, when in reality it was only pushing towards the inevitable growth of the Imperial military complex. On the other hand, Sidious returned to Crais II, where Grand Inquisitor had been doing his bidding. The children were so susceptible to the dark side. The trauma of Order 66 and watching Coleman, Kenobi, and Yoda be defeated by Sidious's hands, there wasn't anything left in the galaxy to convince them that they could be saved. It was the brilliant plan that he only continued to take advantage of. His arrival to Crais II ignited a flame of darkness that was waiting for him here. The children were all, slowly but surely, falling into the grasp of the dark side. On Crais II, there was no light. The planet was constantly consumed in a darkened fog. There was never a glimmer of the sun, and for the Younglings, that meant there was no shining example of hope. There was only darkness, there was only pain, and there was only the dark side. Sidious's rule as Emperor continued to be played out brilliantly with Skywalker still by his side. Under the ruse that Sidious helped him save his wife from imminent death, obviously. While Anakin on Mustafar experienced a power high, when he returned to Coruscant and even in the months after the birth of Luke and Leia, he never even considered the thought of hurting his friend. Sure, the words Sidious used were rather ominous before the execution of Order 66, but there was never any real reason for him to decide to turn against Sidious. He saved her, or at least he convinced himself that's what happened. In reality, that wasn't even the case, but he didn't need to know that. Vader would do missions for Sidious, most of them hunting down other Jedi around the galaxy. The few survivors who stood any chance of a threat against the Sith. That was a joke. Not a single one of them was a threat. Just a nuisance on the rule of the Sith. Vader also helped set up the Empire, but it was all things Sidious used to make sure Anakin and Padme continued to get along. Everything had a long-term plan. Sidious didn't get a ton of interactions with the children because of Padme, but that never stopped Anakin from being untrustworthy to his wife. When she was doing her work, trying to save the galaxy, Sidious was able to visit the children and leave his curse of the dark side within their hearts, something so subtle that neither parent would ever notice until it was already too late. On Crais 2, the younglings began to don darker robes. Sidious and Grand Inquisitor would instruct these individuals on how to wield the dark side. Unlike a plan for the Inquisitors, Sidious wanted the young Jedi to become powerful with the Force. He wanted every single individual that was going to serve his side reach their own individual full potential. For the surviving Jedi in Even Maul, the rising darkness could be felt everywhere in the galaxy. It was a collection of nearly 2,500 Jedi turning into true Sith. Without hope, there was only fear, and for Sidious, that was his greatest ally. He fed off of it, and he watched his little army of Sith turn into users of the dark side. Since most of the Jedi were dead, he couldn't have them actually go out and hunt Jedi to turn their crystals and bleed them, so instead, it was massacring the innocent. Grand Inquisitor or Vader would accompany the younglings to watch them kill people. Whenever Vader was involved, he was informed that the civilians being killed were once slavers or loyal to crime syndicates. Most of the time that wasn't at all true. It was just another way for Sidious to keep Vader on a leash, a way to continue proving how gullible someone could become if they trusted him enough. It was perfect, and all the death and destruction that Vader was a part of only pushed him further into the darkness. As the years went by, Sidious's army on Crais 2 was approaching adulthood. This was only a mere 9 years after the Purge. Kenobi and Tano hadn't been seen, but they hid with each other, keeping the others safe and trying to figure out how to stand up to this threat. By this point, early rebel cells such as Saw Gerrera's rebels and Enfys Nest were eradicated. This was done by the elder members of the Sith Order. Luke and Leia were little prideful examples of the future of the Sith, though they didn't realize that everything Sidious had implemented into their minds was the exact opposite of what their mother, especially, wanted for them. They'd be the antithesis to everything Padme Amidala was. Vader, on the other hand, well, he had two choices: adapt or die. Sidious loved it. He had 2 entire generations of Skywalkers under his heel. All he had to do was simply apply pressure and it would crumble. He was already doing that though. The first 5 years after Order 66 went really well for Anakin and Padme. But as that 6th year rolled around, Sidious started to make Skywalker or Amidala do things that the other disagreed with, either done through blatant or political manipulation. Similarly, as was done with the Jedi, Sidious played the long game. He gave Vader reasons to start distrusting Padme, as he did during the Clone Wars, and he did the same thing with Padme. He praised Vader publicly for stomping out rebels to the Empire, rebels that Padme and Bail were supporting. It was brilliant. Anakin didn't understand how his actions were wrong, and Padme didn't understand how he couldn't see it. But so much had changed between them, that they weren't even the same people they were before the war. Their marriage was crumbling from the inside out, and Sidious thrived off of it. Everything about it was perfect to him. They couldn't stop it once it began. Like rust, it continued to slowly crawl across the surface of a broken relationship. There was no saving grace for it. On Crais 2, in the 9th year since Order 66, Sidious enacted the second part of his step. While a good number of younglings hadn't reached adulthood, Sidious made it extremely clear that he didn't care. The strongest would survive regardless of advantages or disadvantages they had. He returned to the planet of the Sith and told them to fight. Those who survived would continue serving him, and those who either lost or died would serve him in other ways. Sidious turned friend against friend, brother against brother, and sister against sister, as well as allies against allies. It was so fun and brilliant, he just continued to play off of it. He stood on a hill watching his little minions go at each other. The fighting was ruthless. It was a battle that reflected the Sith of the old. The Sith fought with each other with great intensity. Their lightsabers moved with precision and speed. It was an all-out war, and it was intended to be as such. They tried to kill each other. Grand Inquisitor made a note of all those who failed to use their intensity. Good thing almost every single Sith that failed to use the dark side or fight their brothers and sisters either died or lost. The dark side was growing with so much power. Vader couldn't be here. At the moment, he and Padme were having an argument because Leia pushed one of her friends off a balcony and killed her because of a disagreement. It wasn't a gentle push either. It was a forced push, and the little girl's bones were shattered before they even left the balcony. Anakin obviously wasn't in support of this, but he was the one who taught these things to his daughter, which is why there was an argument. Like a hero, Sidious would return and he'd be the saving grace for their daughter, furthering the distance in the bond between the parents and the children. The tense battle on Crais 2 ended with 1,400 Sith still standing. The other 1,100 had either perished or lost. With the victors decided, he sent his legions of stormtroopers to collect those who were killed or injured and send them to one of 3 different facilities. Grand Inquisitor was not privy to this, neither was Vader. Some things just could not be known. Others could. Grand Inquisitor didn't care to know. He was simply loyal to the Emperor. On the other hand, Skywalker never could figure it out because he was always looking in the wrong direction, intentionally done by Sidious. The 1,100 Sith would either be sent to Mount Tantus or Jakku if they survived. Those who didn't would be sent to Exegol so their bodies could be reanimated by the Sith Eternal and used for experimentation. Sidious learned from his master. He could cheat death, but no one else would. His empire would remain eternal, and nothing would ever take it away from him. Those who won would be outfitted with new uniforms to match a more united Sith military. This was the Sith Empire Sidious waited a lifetime to create, and now it was here before him. So many of these individuals were Sith he wanted them to be, loyal, dedicated to darkness, and hungry for chaos. It was perfect, but he would make them wait. On Coruscant, divorce was setting in for Skywalker and Amidala. It was complete. Sidious had ripped their entire marriage apart, and because Skywalker was desperate for some sort of support, he was brought up to Kreis II with his children. It was done the week that Anakin had full custody over his children, instead of the week that Padme did. When the three Skywalkers joined him on Kreis II, Vader was incredibly impressed. He looked at the grandeur of the temple, and the Sith accolades that served him. Sidious then turned to Vader and told him that he had a mission to complete. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka Tano had been seen on a mining world of Mapuzo. His directive was to go there and kill them. There was no room for failure. Vader bowed to his master and left. Luke and Leia were comfortable with being around Sidious. He was their friend, and he was like their family. A godfather, a grandfather, an uncle, or whatever to them. He was just family, and with the divorce between both their parents, at the moment, they didn't want to choose a side, so they chose Palpatine. Why wouldn't they? He understood them. He was there for them. He wanted to support them through this arduous process. As their father was gone, he told them that he often tried to interject. He didn't want anything to happen between Padme and Anakin. Sidious was able to paint both Padme and Anakin in such negative light that their 9-year-old minds didn't know how to understand how their parents could be so awful to one another. It was horrendous. It was a curse that kept on giving. Sidious took the children and told them that he would help them use the dark side. It would be their ally throughout this entire endeavor. There would be no reason to fear. He would help them. Luke and Leia were so appreciative. Not only was Sidious the father figure they needed in the moment, but they were embraced by the 1,400 Sith brothers and sisters here on Kreis II. With a broken home on Coruscant, they could find their belonging here with Sidious and the Sith. They had been introduced to the Sith throughout their lives, which is why Leia was able to kill her friend, with no remorse, mind you. But now they were fully enveloped into the darkness of this new order. Despite the Sith Empire growing here, Sidious's plans for immortality were expanding on Wayland, Jakku, and Exegol. Because of the sheer number of powerful Sith that were captured, scientists had a lot more room to work with. While yes, those who were captured were either dead or the weakest out of the Sith Order, they were still trained adequately and they were far beyond what they would have been as Jedi. This gave the scientists around 780 fresh bodies to work with. As for the Sith Eternal, they had the rest of the failures who died to study and try to reanimate. Padme's attempt at growing a rebellion kept failing, which was all the more fuel to the fire to ignite the divorce between Padme and Anakin. It was lovely, and what made it even better is that while Vader was en route to Mapuzo to kill his former friends, he realized just how much he needed Sidious. He'd always been there for him, and he was always the best person in Anakin's life, the man who only wanted the best for him. It made Sidious even more of a crush than anything else, which would be extremely deadly for Skywalker to rely on. Anakin arrived at Mapuzo and walked around for a little bit, trying to figure out where the two Jedi could be. Any semblance of Anakin Skywalker had been killed off by the divorce, and he was mostly just lost at this point. His presence got the attention of Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, but by this point, they weren't even in the realm of combined power as Vader. He wasn't even quite full power yet, but he was getting there. The training he had completed with his Emperor made him such a foe. When he saw them, he told them that they didn't need to be adversaries, but if they didn't surrender, then he would slaughter them. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan were taken aback by his demeanor, and so, since he was very clearly a threat to them, they ignited their weapons. Vader sprang forward and asked why they had chosen death. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka looked at each other and told him they didn't want this for him. Why was he acting this way? They didn't have time to react as a crimson lightsaber ignited from his side and he stormed forward. Obi-Wan got in front of Ahsoka. He knew Anakin better than anyone, and despite the 9 years since he assumed Skywalker had died, he was still his former apprentice. The two of them clashed together. The pure strength behind Skywalker's blow nearly knocked Kenobi off his feet. He stumbled back and Ahsoka ran forward. He didn't even block her. He reached out, grabbed her wrist with his metallic arm, and crushed it before throwing her to the side. Obi-Wan heard Ahsoka scream out in pain, but he was relieved to see that she was okay, aside from a broken wrist, that is. Obi-Wan ran forward and swung aggressively, switching into Form 4, which he knew would catch Anakin off guard. Vader sidestepped. He swung down, bashing Kenobi's blade into the ground. Obi-Wan reached out to throw the Force forward, which pushed Anakin back a little bit, having his boot slide across the sands. Obi-Wan ran forward and helped Ahsoka up. She was wincing in pain. Vader launched his blade forward as it ripped through Obi-Wan's back and into Ahsoka's chest. They were close enough to each other that he could just get them with a collateral lightsaber throw. He turned away, feeling pity for them. He would return to Kreis II to inform his master of his success. He held out his hands behind him as he walked back towards his ship. Ahsoka's, Obi-Wan's, and his own blade flew into his hands, and he returned to his vessel. Sidious continued his corruption of the Skywalker children. It was too easy at this point. He'd been manipulating them for their entire lives, and now they were just a part of a broken house. They would be even more perfect prey for Sidious to exploit. As his empire continued growing, Sidious knew it would be time to fully turn Anakin into his pupil. He knew that the day would come when he needed to make sure that Vader was entirely on his side, and with the divorce ruining his entire mindset, there was one more twist of the dagger that would completely end the chance of Anakin Skywalker from ever returning. Of course, what made Sidious even happier is that when Vader returned to him with the lightsabers of those he used to care about so much dead, he knew that he was already that much closer. When Skywalker returned to him, he brought Vader inside the temple to where Luke and Leia were. They were standing with the Grand Inquisitor, watching as the Sith warriors trained. Vader asked his master what was the purpose of all this. He simply told his apprentice that power comes at a cost. People will constantly challenge them for their power, and if they didn't prepare for it, then they would lose it. Vader found it to be superstition, but he disregarded it. He respected and appreciated the fact that Sidious was taking care of his children. The next decade of their lives wouldn't change all that much. The Sith Empire would continue to grow. Whenever sight of a Jedi or rebellious group popped up, these warriors of the Sith went out and slaughtered them. Grand Inquisitor and his Inquisitorius were the elite group of the Sith warriors, the best of the best, and they were tasked with hunting down Jedi Masters and igniting temples and artifacts of Sith across the galaxy. It was Sidious's way of rewarding them. Though as Sidious got closer to getting rid of the Imperial Senate, he sent his student out on a mission that would cement him as the student he was destined to become. Sidious told Vader that it was time to kill all those who opposed the regime. This included Padme Amidala. Skywalker, in the moment of hearing those words, only felt rage. The divorce that rocked him left him with so much rage and anger that he didn't know how to just let go. This was highly due to Sidious and Vader's extended time on Kreis too. So Vader did as he was asked. He showed no mercy, and he did not hesitate. He had no love for Padme anymore, only resentment, and he slaughtered those who tried to ignite the flame of rebellion. Vader returned to his master with pride, and Sidious congratulated him for continuing his journey to the dark side. He then told Vader to go to Malachor with the Grand Inquisitor. There was an individual who was stirring up trouble, and he wanted to make sure that individual died. While Vader was gone, Sidious just continued to implement his plan of securing his rule. He brought Luke and Leia back and told them that their mother had been killed in a terrible freak accident. He didn't know what happened, and he told them to go investigate. He didn't inform them that it was their father, he just told them that they were killed on Coruscant. So, because they went to investigate, they found out who did it. They were horrified. Sidious needed them to see that their father did it. He couldn't tell them. Luke and Leia loved their parents too much, even their mother. In the years since the divorce, as the brother and sister grew up, they understood that not everything is as it seems, and while they never took anyone's side, aside from Palpatine's, they forged a new love for a connection with their parents. Though when they learned that it was their father that killed their mother, they were outraged. Never did they connect the dots back to Sidious. When Vader returned to Kreis 2, he was ambushed by his children. He didn't realize it was a fight to the death, and as he defended himself, he was at a loss for words. Vader did everything to calm his children down, but there was no calming them. Sidious wasn't visibly present, but as the fighting continued to intensify, Sith gathered around the duel to watch. For many of the warriors, they saw this as their chance to possibly rise up and become Sidious's true apprentice. This was very intentional. Sidious wanted the Sith to see the Skywalkers as a leech on the Sith, and he wanted to make them seem weak. Because the twins were the Force's way of balancing out Anakin, the fighting was incredibly intense, but it also made Vader look weak in comparison. He was fighting for his life against his two children. Their blades moved with incredible speed as they moved about the massive Sith temple. Sidious was hiding in the rafters, watching the event unfold. His plan would be complete once the victor was crowned. Vader crushed down and beat his son back, and then he had to quickly backpedal so he could hold off an assault made by his daughter. He was stuck between two forces that for the first time in his life since his fall from grace actually challenged him. But at the end of the match, neither of the twins were a match for him. All of his love for his children slipped away when he had to kill both of them in cold blood. It broke him, and as he killed the last of his children, Sidious came around the corner to stop the fighting, only for him to see Skywalker fall to his knees. Like a father would, Sidious came to his side and helped him, asking Vader what had happened. Vader was too broken to speak. While it wasn't said, it was understood. The path of the Sith required sacrifice. It's what Sidious did to Dooku and to Maul. It's what Plagueis did to him, and it's what Tenebras did to Plagueis. The path of the Sith was forged through hate and strength. If there was none of that, then there was no Sith. Sidious put on display Vader's fragility, and the only thing Vader could cling on to was his connection to Sidious. While he could try and connect the dots, there'd be no way for him to do that. Sidious had expertly planned around everything, so that if Skywalker decided to blame anyone, he would just blame himself. It was a masterclass on manipulation and gaslighting. Sidious succeeded in every area, and it was entirely intentional. While Vader was loathing his loss, he got one thing into his mind, one silver lining that he would never see come into fruition. He believed that one day he would take the throne for his own, but Sidious ensured he had his own immortality, that he never shared. The usage of the other half of the Sith army, the half that had been sent to the labs, had brought him the speedy scientific research to usher him into the position of true mortality. While Skywalker lived, Sidious kept up the ruse of an elder individual, but Skywalker never focused on Sidious. His one and only focus was ever on those who tried to overthrow him. When Vader eventually died of a natural death, he believed he was truly loved by the one man who gave him so much, the only father figure that truly cared about him. Never did he realize that the one he believed gave him so much ripped everything from his hands. Sidious's rule in his Sith Empire would last for as long as the Sith were able to serve under Sidious, which inevitably would be for eternity. And that, my friends, is our dark story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Johnny Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Younglings Slayer 66, Mad Matty Studios, Anakin003, Frodo's Legacy Star Wars, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with three first names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out the Patreon, there's other cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. The direction I wanted to go with this one was definitely a Palpatine story. I was really kind of twisted on what I wanted to do at the end. I thought about killing Anakin, but I was like, you know, what if he had to kill his own kids? That's kind of messed up. But I wanted to show the brilliance of Palpatine. He's the one villain throughout the entire saga, and he's that one villain for a reason. He is a genius. He's very smart. Does he get lucky a lot of times? Yeah, he gets lucky a lot of the times. But, you know, his arc throughout the series is literally immortality, and so I wanted him to get to that point of immortality in the story and actually keep it. But the role of the Sith Empire, like, it was kind of a fun thing to do, like, have him create the Sith Empire. The cool thing with the Sith Empire is that he created it, but he didn't ever really need it. It was just like a security blanket for him. That was kind of the intention of it, just an extra security blanket. And because he was in the temple and killed Yoda, then it just allowed Skywalker to not lose to Obi-Wan and Mustafar, which allowed Anakin to kind of be more loyal, and for Palpatine to exploit that loyalty. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the dark side be with you.